Cloud Gurus, and welcome to this lecture. In this lecture, we're going to build our very first serverless website with Route 53, API Gateway, Lambda, and S3. Let's have a look at how it's going to work. So we've got our user. They want to go ahead and get the IP address for helpmestudyawspoly.com, which is the domain I'm about to register with Route 53. Route 53 will return that IP address to the user's web browser. They then want to go ahead and actually get the web page from S3. So they're going to be able to navigate to that S3 bucket. It's going to return a web page, but the actual web page has static and dynamic content, and they need to get the dynamic content. The dynamic content will simply be my name or your name, and it will then, their browser will then send a GET request over to API Gateway. API Gateway will then send that, forward that GET request on to Lambda. Lambda will then respond, and then we will send that user's name back to them. So really simple site, and it's going to use basically 3 or 4 different components. So API Gateway, Route 53, S3, and Lambda. So let's go ahead and get started and log into the AWS console. The code for this is all in the resources section of the course, so please download the code now and unzip it. Okay, so I'm here in the AWS console. Now, when we're registering a domain name and using static websites for in S3, you need to check 2 things. You need to check that the domain name is available. You also need to check that the bucket name is available, and the bucket name and the domain name have to be the same. So I'm going to register helpmestudyawspoly.com. The first thing I'm going to do is make sure that's available in S3. You check S3 first because it's free to register bucket names. With domain names, it's not free. So helpmestudyawspoly.com. And I'm going to create that in the Northern Virginia region, and I'm just going to go ahead and hit create, and that is available. So if provided it's available on Route 53, this is all going to work. So I'm just going to click in here, and I'm going to go over to properties, and I'm going to enable static website hosting for this bucket. So use this bucket to host a website. If we quickly just go over and have a look at our code. So this is where I've unzipped the code. It's just index.html and error.html. This Python is what we're going to use for our Lambda function. So I'm going to type in here index.html and then error.html. I'm going to go ahead and hit save. And that has now created our bucket. Now, I can't do anything yet because we do need to edit our code. The very next thing I need to do, well, I can't upload our code to our S3 bucket yet because I'm going to need to put in my API Gateway endpoint into that code at some point. Okay, so that is now an S3 static website bucket. The next thing we need to do is go over to Route 53. So if we go over to services and we scroll down, we'll see Route 53 here under network and content delivery. And then what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to register this as a domain, help me study AWS Poly, and just check that that's available. Hopefully it is, and yes it is. So you have to make sure that the bucket name is available and the domain name is available. If they're different, it's not going to work. Your bucket name always must be the same as the domain name, and by that I just mean that this top level. You don't have to have the bucket name with .com, but the top this level here, not top level, but then the next level down. So help me study AWS Poly. I have to have that as the bucket name as well as the domain name. So I'm going to add that to my cart. I'm just going to go ahead and register this now. It's going to cost me $12. This is completely optional if you want to do this or not. You can just use the S3 URL for the rest of this course if you don't want to spend the money. So I'm going to go ahead and register this now and just pause the video. Okay, I now have registered that. Sometimes it says it can take up to 3 days to complete. That really, some very rare cases it takes that long. Usually you should have it in about 10 or 15 minutes, or sometimes even less. So paused the video and just updated it, and my Help Me Study AWS Poly is now registered. So we've configured our S3 bucket as a website. We have gone in and configured Route 53 or bought a domain name, and we've made sure that our bucket name is the exact same as our Route 53 domain name, including the top level domain. So helpmestudypoly.com, helpmestudyawspoly.com. Next thing we need to do is configure our Lambda function. So let's go over to services and we'll go into Lambda. which is under compute. If you haven't had a Lambda function before, you're going to see this splash screen. Just click on create a Lambda function. So we're going to be using this all from scratch. Later on, when we go and build our Alexa skill, we're going to be using the serverless application repository. There's 3 ways of doing Lambda functions, all from scratch, blueprints, which are pre-configured templates as a starting point for your Lambda function. So these are just Lambda functions that are pre-configured. And then we have the serverless application repository. And this is basically CloudFormation templates that build serverless applications automatically for you. So we're going to use some Alexa serverless application repository skills later on, or at least one. And if you are interested in learning more about Alexa development, we do have a course on the Cloud Guru platform where we'll teach you how to build 3 skills. And again, we use the serverless application repository for that as well. So in here, let's call this my serverless website. So that's going to be our function name. We're going to be using Python 3.6. If you haven't used Lambda before, we're going to have to create a new role. And the role is essentially just allowing Lambda the permission to execute. So we'll call this, I like to call it my Lambda role. And we're just going to use a policy template, and the policy template you want is simple microservice permissions. So this allows Lambda to execute. That's all it does. So there we go. We go ahead and hit create function, and that should now create our function. And we should be ready to go. Okay, so my function has now been created. Now, if we scroll down, this is what Lambda looks like. So we've got our configuration in here. We've got our monitoring. Here's our designer. If we scroll down, we'll be able to see our function code. So here's our actual function. This is an acquisition Amazon made, which used to be called Cloud9, which is it's basically a cloud integrated development environment, or IDE. So you can actually write your code now directly into Lambda, which is really, really cool. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be changing this code here to our own code. So all we need to do is just go over to where you downloaded your code. Okay, so I'm in the directory where I've unzipped my code. Hopefully you've done that in the resources section. I'm just going to go ahead and open that up with my favorite my favorite text editor, which is Text Wrangler. On Windows, I use Notepad++. And in here, we've got our function. So basically, all you want to do is change the name. My name at the moment is, the body is Ryan Cronenberg. You want to change this to your own name. Once you've done that, copy it into your clipboard and go back over to Lambda. And here we are, we're back in the console. I'm just going to delete all these lines and paste in my own. So make sure it is your own name. Go ahead and click up here and go save, and that will now save our function. If we scroll all the way back up the top, we're almost ready to go. What we need to do is add in our triggers. Now, triggers are really popular exam topics in both Solutions Architect Associate as well as Developer Associate. So our triggers are API Gateway, AWS IoT, the Alexa Skills Kit, the Alexa Smart Home, CloudFront, CloudWatch Events, CloudWatch Logs, Code Commit, Cognito Sync Trigger, DynamoDB, Kinesis, S3, and SNS. Seriously, you will probably get a question saying which of the following is not a Lambda trigger, so it is worth trying to memorize all this going into your exam. So we're going to add API Gateway as a trigger. It says in here configuration required. If you scroll down, you can see here configure triggers. So it says we'll set up an API Gateway endpoint, which will trigger your integration. And in here, pick an existing API or create a new one. We're going to create a new API. The API name, just enter it in here. So I'm going to call my API my serverless website. Maybe my serverless, yeah, why not website? And then the deployment stage, this is going to be in production. And in here it says configure the security mechanism for your API endpoint. So do you want it to have IAM? Do you want it to be open, or do you want it to be open but you have to supply an access key before you can use it? I'm just going to make mine open. And it gives you a warning here saying your API endpoint will be publicly available and can be invoked by all users. That's fine. For this particular one, you could, if you wanted a little bit extra security, do open with access key, but we're not going to keep this anyway. We're going to delete this once we go onto the Polylab anyway. So just go ahead and do open, go ahead and hit add. That has now created our API. If you click up here and just save your function, it's going to save everything. So if we click this little button here, we're actually going to get the invoke URL. You can try copying and paste that into your browser, but it's not going to work just yet because we need to go in and configure it. What you can do is click on My Serverless website, and that is going to open up the API gateway page, and you can see your API gateway is in here. So what we now need to do is go ahead and configure this. First thing I want you to note around the API gateway is this UI, and I really like this UI because it actually helps you visualize exactly what's going on. So you've got your client, which is our little user. They're going to send a method request. At the moment it could be any, but we want to make it only a get. So they're going to send a get request. This is then going to be basically proxied over to Lambda. Here's our Lambda function in here. We could click on this and it would open up our Lambda function. And then that Lambda function is going to process that request and then do a response. It's then going to send that back to API Gateway, and API Gateway is going to send a method response back to our client, which will hopefully be our name. So what we want to do is we're going to change this over to a GET request. Let's just start by deleting this method. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this, and then I'm going to go and create a new method, and the method is going to be a GET. So these are all our valid HTML methods. So I'm going to make mine a GET. I'm going to click the little tick, and that's going to give us our setup. So in here we've got the integration point for your new method. So what do we want to connect this method to? Do we want it to be to a Lambda function or to HTTP? Do we want to give it a mock response? Maybe this is a development API that we're testing. Do we want another AWS service? Do we want to link this into a VPC? We're going to select Lambda functions, and then we're going to use proxy integration. So we're going to allow it to proxy this across to Lambda. And here's your region. If you actually type in your function here, it's only going to be the functions that exist within that region. So make sure you note the region in which your Lambda function exists. So mine's in US East 1. Click on My Serverless website, and I'm going to go ahead and hit save. And this then says you're about to give API Gateway permission to invoke your Lambda function, and here is the ARN of our Lambda function, so the Amazon resource name of our Lambda function. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And that has now set it all up, so it will be almost ready to go. The next thing we need to do is go ahead and deploy our API. So let's click in here and go deploy. Deployment stage, I'm going to deploy this into production, and this deployment description will be my first prod deployment, something like that. I'm going to go ahead and hit deploy. And you'll see now that we're in stages. So if you ever need to get back to this screen, go over to stages, click on prod, and then click on get. You'll have your invoke URL. So if we click on this, we should hopefully be able to get our name. And there we go. It's API Gateway is triggering a Lambda function, and the Lambda function is responding with my name, and you can see it there. If you click back and you want to get that URL again, just click on stages and then prod. Grab the URL. I'll quickly show you what it looks like as well if we were to do a curl command in an EC2 instance. So here I am in an EC2 instance. I'm just going to curl and then that, and then I'm going to output it into something like myname.txt, let's say. So if we nano myname.txt, there we go. We can see it's my EC2 instance has called API Gateway. It has gotten my name, and it has then saved that to a text file. So now that we've done all this, we're ready to upload or edit our code and then upload it to S3. So go to where you just downloaded your code. Okay, so I'm here where I downloaded my code. All we want to do is open up index.html with our favorite text editor, so Text Wrangler or Notepad++. And so we've opened it up. All we need to do is change this line of code here from your API Gateway link here and just paste in your API Gateway and hit save. I'll quickly just go through what it is this code does. So it's HTML. We've got our header here. In our header, we've got some JavaScript, which has a function called myFunction. And then we've got the body. In here, we've got a header which says hello. And then it says the ID is my demo, Cloud Gurus. And then we've got a button. And on click, it's going to execute this function. And the button says click me. And we're going to end our button. So the function in here, and you can see the function, basically what we're going to do is a HTTP request The HTTP request is going to be a GET request. It's going to go to our API gateway URL, and if it's successful, so if the status is 200, then it's going to display the response. And then we've got an image, and you'll see what this image is at the end of the lecture. It's one of my favorite photos in the whole wide world. So let's go ahead and save this and go back over to the AWS console. So I'm back in the AWS console. I'm going to go over to services, and I'm going to go down to S3, which is under storage. So down in here. Okay, so that has now opened up my S3. You can see my S3 website in here, helpmestudyawspoly.com. Let's go ahead and click on that. I'm going to upload my files. So let's add our files in here. So it's error and index.html. I'm going to go ahead and hit upload. And then the very last thing we need to do is make these public. So if we just go more and click on make public and make public, that will now make our HTML file public, and our index.html and our error.html. And the very last thing we need to do is we need to go over to Route 53. So we'll go down to networking, Route 53, Route 53, and click on hosted zones. And in here, I've got my hosted zones, help me study aws.poly. And I'm going to create a record set. And this record set is going to be an alias record. So it's just going to be the naked domain name, or so it's not going to have a www or anything like that. So just click on alias. And in here, you've got your targets. So if we click in here, you should be able to see your S3 website in here. If you can't, if it says no targets available, it means that your S3 bucket name and your Route 53 domain name are not the same. And it does include the top level domain name as well. So you do definitely need that. Let's go ahead and click in here. I'm going to go ahead and hit create. And that has now created my A record, and it's an alias, and it's pointing back to my S3 bucket. So the next thing I need to do is just go over to help me study aws.poly. Okay, so I'm just going to type in help me study aws.poly.com, and I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. And there we go. It says hello cloud gurus, and it says click me. We click me, that will then send a request off to API Gateway, which will trigger our Lambda function, which will return our name back to API Gateway, which should hopefully come back to our browser. There we go. Hello, Ryan Kronenberg. And you might be wondering what this picture is. This is my favorite photo in the whole wide world. So this is my son, Ethan. This is me. It's the 6th of February, 2018. And that is the Falcon Heavy taking off, sending a Tesla to Mars. So I was lucky enough to take a week off to go see that. We're at Cape Canaveral, and we watched the Falcon Heavy, which is the world's largest rocket ship in terms of thrust, take a Tesla into space. It seriously was one of my favorite days in my whole life, so I figured I'd just chuck that up there. If we do have any SpaceX engineers or Tesla engineers watching the course, big shout out to you. Please tweet me. Massive fan. Anyway, you have done really, really well. You've taken your first step into a serverless world. This was a very, very basic website. You can configure it any way that you want. In the next 2 lectures, we're going to split it up into 2 parts. We're going to create a serverless website using Poly. So we're going to have the same bricks and mortar as what we've had in this one. So we're going to have API Gateway, we're going to have S3, we're going to have Route 53, and then we are also going to have Lambda. But we're going to add in the Poly service. We're going to have multiple Lambda functions, and we're also going to have DynamoDB as well. So it's going to be a bit more full on. But once you have created that, you'll be able to cut and paste your notes into that. That will then run the notes through the Poly service, creating MP3 files, which will be stored in S3. And then in the very last lecture in this series, we're going to create an Alexa skill that will play those. So go ahead, go have a break. And if you've got the time, please join me in the next lecture. Thank you.